experts in the business. Flowers, trees, fruit and veg, letter by letter, they're all coming up a treat on the A to Z of TV gardening. Everything we're looking at today begins with the letter
O. Here's what's coming up. We go out searching for rare wild orchids.
They're just like the plant equivalent of diamonds.
They're a girl's best friend.
Oh, yeah.
They're a guy's best friend too, because I like them.
Know your onions. Wanted on and getting them all year round.
The theory is that you store your main crop now, and they will last you through till about April or May, and then these follow on in succession.
And organic planting. The history of how it went mainstream.
And when I've said stop spraying, nobody's believed me.
That's all to come, but first we look at a flower that is so common these days that you wouldn't dream it was once on the brink of extinction. O is for orchids.
And Carol Klein is going back to school to learn the do's and don'ts of growing them.
Ruthlington School. It's an ordinary school with an extraordinary secret. Through the gates and up past the bike sheds is an enormous old greenhouse. Inside, there's always a myriad of activity. Pupils and orchids everywhere. And it's all down to their physics teacher. I mean, when I was at school, people weren't growing orchids. It wasn't on the national curriculum, was it, orchid growing? How did it all come about?
Well, it's been going here a long time. This is my 19th year at the school. And orchids have become a really big part of what we do.
Yeah.
So if you arrived at school now, aged 11, you could volunteer and come along to Greenhouse Club.
Oh, I would,
and then get stuck in. And once you've been here and shown an interest, you'd get a group of your own plants to look after and get ready for shows and propagate.
So, girls, what are these you're growing?
These are the hardy orchids, and they are ones that can grow in English weather, so they don't have to be in hot temperatures, and you just put them out in your conservatory. And
Right.
okay.
So they're great orchids to start with, aren't they?
Yeah. This is a Masdevallia.
Right. And it's growing on a lump of wood?
Yes, what we do is, in cool, wet conditions, we get the plant and we put the roots in the bark
Right.
of the wood.
And that's all it needs?
Yeah.
Just a bit of bark. Couldn't be
Yeah.
easier, could it? I think this is one of the most beautiful orchids we've seen in here.
Yes, it's called a Bulbophyllum pictorum, and it smells like rotten fish.
Yeah. Why?
Because it attracts flies and insects.
Right. And they pollinate
Yeah,
it.
and they pollinate it. And also, which is unique about it, is a little part inside moves in. If you want to blow on it, it will move.
Come on then, let's have a go. 1, 2, 3.
Three.
Oh, look!
And,
It's quivering,
yes,
isn't it?
it's really nice.
Yeah. Can I join you, please? I've got an exam later on, so I want the lowdown on the simplest way of growing orchids. If I'm growing them for the first time, what are the things I've got to remember?
Not to overwater. Water 2 to 3 times a week with rainwater only.
Right, brilliant.
Don't overpot your orchid. They prefer to be pot-bound.
Right, so keep your pot small.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Don't use the wrong compost.
Right.
Orchids grow on trees, so the main component of any orchid compost should be air.
So, what else?
Well, don't be impatient with your orchid, as unlike tomato plants, they do grow very slowly and it could take a couple of years before they fully flower. You've also got to try and keep your orchid in the right temperature zone, around about 10 degrees to 15 degrees.
I've learned loads about orchids, but now it's time for the big test.
Okay, right, today we're going to do an exam on the do's and don'ts of orchid growing. Question number 1 is what is the main component of any orchid compost? Right then, which of these pots would be best to pot this plant in? Which of these would be the worst ingredient to use as our compost? We've got a bit of perlite, soil, or bark. No conferring. So, assuming it's a cymbidium, what would be the best temperature to keep it at? And last question, question number 5. I want 2 examples of something you shouldn't do to your orchid. Okay, if you could put down your pen or pencil. The test is finished. Carol, we will be revealing your results at Gardeners World Live. But in the meantime, we do have a book that we want you to take away. It's our orchid book that we've written, The Do's and Don'ts of Orchid Growing. So get swatting.
So, Luke, how did I get on?
Well, you got 5 out of 5.
Ooh! I'm no good at exams.
Except for question 4, where you put 2 answers down. So you cheat a little bit, but
Yeah, well, it always pays to hedge your
it
bets,
does,
doesn't
yeah.
it? Oh, but that's fantastic. And all down to this little book.
Yep.
It's just so packed with information, it's terrific. And to having a very good teacher too.
Oh, thank you.
We'll continue in the subject of orchids and head to Luningston Castle in Kent to meet Tom Harddyke, a man so passionate about these flowers that it's almost cost him his life.
This is the World Garden, and this is where I've got quite a good selection of hardy orchids from all over the world. And the idea of the World Garden is to show you where things originally come from in the miniature land masses here, and who introduced them.
For Tom, studying them in the wild is the best way to learn how to cultivate the orchid.
They are the largest family of flowering plants on our planet. Every single continent you've got the orchid family on, except for Antarctica. Some grow under ice within the Arctic Circle. And it's the variety of flower colour, it's their exotic look, their rarity, their challenging places that they actually grow. And when you do find them, it's fantastic. And this one here is actually a hybrid originally from Table Mountain in South Africa. It's a Dyza, or Dyza uniflora. It's a real sod of an orchid to grow. It requires rainwater, the hard water here with all the chalk in it would kill it, a sort of acidic mix, slightly peaty mix as well. I've never flowered this before. It's been 2 or 3 years waiting for it to flower, and it's only come out in the last couple of days.
The secret of his success is following in the footsteps of the Victorian plant hunters. But Tom's quest to see orchids in the wild has led him to some of the most dangerous places in the world. On a journey into the Colombian jungle, he was kidnapped, beaten, and held under threat of execution for 9 months. His parents presumed him dead. For the Victorians, it was a lucrative trade that led them to take risks. But for Tom, it's something more fundamental.
I have green blood cells. My heart is pumping chlorophyll around me. It becomes an addiction trying to find things in the wild. And here we have one of my most exciting orchids, Encyclia pentotis, but it's no ordinary orchid. These are one of the, this is one of the families I was looking for whilst being in captivity and whilst I was travelling in that area after being kidnapped.
Tom had never had much success flowering this variety until he'd made that ill-fated trip to its natural habitat in Colombia.
And you can read all the books that you want. You simply can't beat seeing things in the wild. I've flowered this more in the last 5-6 years than I ever have before, because I've seen the perfect drainage that they need. In comes the rain, batters the shrubs with pouring torrential rain. Then within 10 minutes, there was not a cloud in the sky. It's blue skies, and the sun bearing down on this plant dries it literally to a crisp within half an hour. So in cultivation, let them dry up between the watering. It's hugely helpful.
While many tropical orchids may be fussy plants to nurture indoors, there are over 50 native varieties that grow wild here and enjoy our climate. So it's not surprising that Tom grows some of his most prized orchids in the coldest part of his garden.
And it's here, for me, that this is the most exciting hardy orchid that we've got growing at Luningston. This is from 2 plants 4 years ago. They are amazing how they've spread. Blatilla striata, known also as the hyacinth orchid or the windowsill orchid, which is a misleading name because they are hardy outdoor orchids, here in the more purple form with the deep purpley pink centres and lighty creamer upper part of the lip or labellum here. Very attractive. And this form, in more of a whitish alba form, as you can see, with a lovely pink purplish lip at the end, are really, really easy to grow in pots, on the patio, rockeries. They're excellent. What I would say is not direct all-day baking sunshine. A bit of light shade. It's a woodland plant, after all, from Japan.
So, hardy orchids can be just as exacting as their tropical cousins.
We'll come back to orchids later on, but now we move on to a style of planting that's so common these days that we forget it was once considered highly controversial. Our next O is for organic planting. And we're looking back at how it was first approached in Gardener's World by Jeff Hamilton through the eyes of his fellow presenters.
I think perhaps Jeff went through that crisis of conscience that all gardeners of our relative age went through, who were brought up on chemicals and control-freakish garden, if you like. When anything appeared that was untoward, you wiped it out.
I think he saw organics as a personal journey. And he wasn't evangelical about it. And for quite a long time, he will give you both options. If you're organic, you do this. If you're not organic, you use that chemical. But it was something that evolved.
I think that the control plot, first of all, Whether you feed organically or chemically, you really have got to give your plants something. Those really are pathetic. I've been having the odd spot of trouble with my melons. I'm trying out a new organic growing bag and comparing it with an inorganic one that I've used successfully for many years now. We can't use slug pellets because it's an organic plot, so I'm going to try a new method. This is very coarse bark. This is the organic herbicide, the good old hoe. And the organic plot, well, it speaks for itself. It certainly is a viable alternative.
I actually, personally, discouraged Jeff being too organic. But in most cases, the presenter's views were what you got.
So all in all, I'm convinced that organic gardening is a viable alternative.
I think that he realised that he needed to change. And he took you with him as the viewer, and that was very powerful because you trusted him. You didn't quite know where you were going, but you were quite happy for him to take you there.
It took 5 years of trials, all shared with Gardeners World viewers, before Jeff stopped using chemicals altogether at Barnsdale, convinced that organic gardening was the way forward.
And when I've said stop spraying, nobody's believed me. Well, here's the proof of the pudding. This is my honeysuckle, and it's thriving without a sign of greenfly or blackfly, and it has never been sprayed with anything at all. My theory is that if you spray indiscriminately, then you kill the things that eat the greenfly and the blackfly too, and just build up troubles for yourself.
There was a huge backlash from the chemical companies who felt that they were no longer being adequately represented on a Friday night on the flagship gardening programme. They were, and still are, an enormous section of the commercial horticultural industry, and they felt that they'd... Not only had they lost a voice on a Friday night, but quite the reverse, they were actually now being criticised.
So what? You know, he had much higher aims, much higher views, and, you know, I mean, he cared more about the planet and the plants and your garden.
And we stay with Carol Klein as she helps Russell and Joe Ash to go organic. To find out how, they're visiting a pioneering centre of green gardeners.
In 1973, in the mountains of Mid Wales, a small community of people got together, all joined by a single desire to create a sustainable future. Their home had begun life as a disused quarry near the Welsh village of Machynlleth, but as they worked to find new ways of solving the environmental issues affecting the planet, the community soon had a new name, the Centre for Alternative Technology. Initially, there wasn't much support for these eco-pioneers, but slowly their financial aid grew, as did the number of volunteers. Today, CAT is Europe's leading eco-centre. So I suppose everybody who came here really was, you know, a pioneer. I mean, did you feel like that?
Yeah, we did, actually. In those days, we really did.
Yeah.
It had that air about it, you know.
Yes.
We were going to change the world.
And do you think you have changed the world? I mean, there's so many people who come to visit now and who are interested in these sorts of ideas, aren't there?
It's true, and there's windmills erupting all over the place, you know. And solar panels, they're seeing the importance of that. Yeah. Not using chemicals for the gardening. Yeah.
I mean, organic gardening at one time was thought of as being, well, something daft that people with sandals on did.
The locals regarded us as the wind place. Because we used human manure in those days. We're not allowed to use it now.
No. But it's how they garden at CAT now that I want Joan Russell to see. I've brought them here to experience sustainable gardening practices in their purest form, in the hope they can take a taste of those techniques home with them to Devon. You just don't expect it, do you, a place like this in the middle of a quarry?
I know, it's wonderful, isn't it?
We brought our soil along with us as well, so perhaps we can get that.
You're going to get that tested?
And see where that's at.
Everywhere you look, it's full of intriguing ideas, isn't it?
Little pockets of things here and there. Can't wait to have an investigate.
More, yeah.
If you want to take out two sort of level spoons of that.
Okay.
That's it. Brilliant. And then we just top it up with this water here, which is deionised water. And this is just a little tablet that you crush. You put it in there and you crush it down. And what will happen is, we wait a minute, the colour of the water will change.
So the soil that we've got in our garden, if we're living fairly close to the sea, do you think potentially it might have a certain amount of sand in it, or?
Depends where you are.
The rock that's out on the coast is a type of sedimentary mud and sandstone mix.
Yeah, so you'll have probably have a sandy soil.
Right. Okay.
Which means it is quite free draining.
Right.
But in the summertime, you're more likely to be suffer from drought problems. If you look at this, You hold it up to light. Try and figure out which of the colours is most like
closest
that.
to-
It's got a bluey tinge.
Yeah.
It's certainly not yellow.
No, that's
And it's not that blue.
It's not blue, no.
So something around
Somewhere around
6.57, which is fairly neutral.
Neutral, yeah.
So you know, you can get away with pretty much anything as long as they're not acid-loving. I mean, it's 6.5, so it's slightly acidic. So you've got a good range that you can plant in there.
Okay.
Don't have to worry too much about that.
Recycling will be an important part of gardening for Joe and Russell. And while they're here, they want to learn as much as possible about it. Top of their list is composting.
Composting doesn't really begin in the garden so much as in the kitchen with your kitchen scraps, and from Kat's point of view, that's what we're always trying to get people to do, is start composting their kitchen scraps and their cardboard, so it doesn't go off to landfill site and instead gets used as compost and gets put in your own garden to feed your plants to get the nutrients back in your soil.
Is there a limit to how much cardboard you can put in?
Well, there's a good ratio to have, which is 2 parts of green stuff to every 1 part of what we call browns, which is the cardboard, and other more woody waste and stuff like that from the garden. Leaf mould is great as adding bulk to the soil, and also can be used as a mulch as well to keep suppress weeds and things like that. Basically, just put all the leaves into one bin and leave them to themselves to get on with the process of decomposition. So the wormery is great for a small garden. You could even have it on a balcony if you wanted to, or a small backyard.
And that's it. It's tiny, actually, isn't it?
It is quite small, isn't it?
Yeah.
This is a commercial wormery. It's very easy to get hold of. It comes as a kit. So there's 3 different levels to your average wormery. It allows you to fill up 1 layer. When that's full, you put another empty container on.
Right.
And the worms, once they've finished composting 1 level of waste, they go up into the next. And it's they all have holes in them. And you can see underneath, this is the more composted waste. So the worms are really doing their job in this one.
Yeah.
The kind of worms that work in this bin are not earthworms, because earthworms like to burrow into deeper soils when it gets too warm or too cold. These are called tiger worms, but again, you can get these quite easily from a supplier.
And then there's a liquid giving off as well, isn't there?
There is, that's right.
What's up there?
Well, one of the things that people don't necessarily realise is that, you know, the way that plants take up the nutrients from compost or soil is through liquid. You know, they don't eat the compost, they take it up through the roots in liquid.
Sure.
And so what you get from out of here is a liquid that you can use as organic fertiliser.
Let's hope Russell and Joe find that helpful.
Still to come, we look at the best way to plant olive trees and find out how you can turn your garden into an ornamental one. But first, let's learn the basics of an eye-watering crop.
This O is for onions, and here's Monty Don.
Put that on side. First of all, I think I need to rake that over. If you remember, we had potatoes in here, which I lifted. These were Charlotte, and they've been good. But when I lifted potatoes, I added compost, forked it over, and although it's rather dry, that's good soil. Now, overwintering onions are sometimes called Japanese onions, because a lot of them have Japanese varieties. I've actually got a couple of varieties I've grown before, are reliable, and I like the taste of. And taste is always the important thing. I've got 2 varieties. There's a white onion called Radar. Good, really tough, but quite a delicate taste, which I like very much, and also electric red. Red onions are colour, they are glamour, and also they tend to be slightly sweeter. And the best thing to do is just dib holes about 4 or 5 inches apart. Obviously, the wider apart they are, the bigger the bulb. And I don't like onions too big. I think a tennis ball is perfectly big enough. Just a row along there. These will be ready for harvesting about June, early July, so just a month or 6 weeks ahead of main crop. But the theory is that you store your main crop now, and they will last you through till about April or May, and then these follow on in succession. Now, there's very little else to do, but you do need to keep an eye on them, because birds tend to come along and they see this thing wiggling up, and they pull at it. And it's quite common to come down in the morning and find them scattered around, and that is birds. And the best way to counter that is to cover them with fleece and weigh them down until you see good green shoots, which means the roots have grown and anchored into the soil. It doesn't always happen, so I'm not going to fleece them straight away. Now, you dib a hole to put it in, because there's a basal plate that the roots grow from, and if you just ram it into the soil and almost screw it into the ground, there's a real danger of damaging that and therefore affecting root growth. I actually quite often use my finger instead of a dibber, although you could argue that my fingers were made for dibbing. Now I'm watering these in just to make sure that the soil, which is very dry, firms around the bulbs. So I'm using a rose rather than a direct jet, which would just knock the bulbs out of the holes. Right, that's the job done.
If you've planted more than you need, Toby Buckland will show you the way on the skill of onion storing.
I've had a really good year for onions, and now's the time to store them. Now, the key thing when it comes to storing these bulbs is to dry them first. So these have been sitting under glass to make their skins go papery dry and rustly. And what they like is good airy conditions. That just keeps them fresh and keeps the rot away. Given that, and they'll last well beyond Christmas. Now, my favourite thing is to string them up. They look so ornamental when they're put on strings, and they also are easy to harvest from. And on the bottom, I'm doing a hangman's noose. So I've got the standing piece of line, and I wrap the end round it a couple of times, and then just tie a couple of, well, I believe they're called granny knots, in on the end. So I've got my loop at the base. Now I've got my onion. This one is called Stuttgarter. It's quite a flat onion, a flat bulb, and I like it because it's got a very mild flavour, and it's a good keeper too. And I also grew some Mammoth in Bruges, but what makes these so lovely is that they're sweet. You see, those go into that loop at the base, just get wrapped round once or twice. I'll get another big one. Put that in there. And what I'm doing is making a solid base at the bottom of the string. Okay, I've got those 3 onions there. They're hard to hold on to, but by sliding the knot down, it just pinches them in place. Now, if you do this and they fall away, it doesn't really matter. Just reload the loop, and it will start to tighten on itself as you wind on more onions. Go with the Stuttgarter next. Oh, look at that. This is the type of onion you don't want to keep. You see it's got that little bit of brown or blacking at the base. That means it's starting to rot. And that, if that was left, could spread to the rest of my onion string. If I cut it open, you'll see. Just in the base there. The rot's already going into the flesh, making it soft. So this one, and any others like it, will be buried deep in the compost heap. And certainly not kept. Next onion, nice and firm, good and rustly. And then, the name of the game is just to keep adding onions, working your way round the string, or the cord, right the way up to its top. Onion on, slide it down. And the place to keep them is somewhere cool, like a shed. Nice and dry, though, where the temperatures are even.
Thanks, Toby. Next, a tree we normally associate with warmer countries, but it's now so widely grown that its fruits are one of the most extensively cultivated crops in the world.
Oh, it's for olive trees. And we're joining Mark MacDonald and wife Emma as they prepare for their first appearance at the Chelsea Flowers Show.
A lot of the people buy olives to remind them of their holidays. You know, it's as simple as that. There's still a lot of people who believe they won't grow here. We still get people who say that. The nursery started in 2004, and this was a totally bare field site. It was Emma and I and my father, who's retired, but said he'd give us 3.5 years. And Emma's father came on board. He retired about 3 years ago. It's very much family. We handpick all of our stock. I've done about 50, 60 trips to Spain now, so I sort of know exactly what I want and where I'm going to find it. We are always looking for specific things. This last trip I was trying to find certain trees that met certain criteria for the show. We go to more northern regions and inland regions of Spain because it gets cold in the winter, so when they come here it's no shock to the plants.
Mark's the one that makes things happen, but I tend to sort of just work out if it's really going to be possible and sort of cross-question him. And do you really think we can do that? And Mark's sort of, yes, we'll do it.
And Emma's background's more garden design and seeing the whole thing, the layout of it, which I can't picture at all.
Yeah, I like putting them together with other plants and sort of making it all knit together and making it look more in keeping. Well, basically, we've gone for 2 raised beds each side because It's quite a big space, and we thought that a sort of variation in heights would work quite nicely, and it would just elevate the two main big trees, gnarled trees, up above the crowns of the smaller trees in the middle. And also the gnarled trees do work really well if you can sort of slightly look up to them.
Chelsea's very important for us. The biggest problem we have is the size of root ball and then the weight of the plant.
So basically we've got two trees and they're on the corners, so hopefully people will get nice and close and be able to touch the bark if they want to.
The trees that we have on site in the UK already that we've had over the winter won't be in flower at Chelsea. I'd like them to be in flower, but they wouldn't be in flower in the UK normally at that time. So that we're leaving the delivery from Spain in another few weeks to try and bring them on a bit more, so they'll then be in flower in May. The risk is that they'll come on too much and they'll have flowered and gone over, in which case you probably won't be able to use them because it'll just be full of
brown flower.
Yeah, blossom that's gone over.
Well, Mark, they're not quite in flower, are they? They're just coming into flower right now.
Yeah. Another week, 10 days, and they'd have been just perfect, but there we go.
But hollies don't need to be in flower. You know, fantastic plant, evergreen foliage, lovely silvery colour. I use them all over London, brilliant on roof terraces as well. But this is your first time at Chelsea.
Yeah.
You're just trying to get the point across that there's different varieties available, really.
Yeah, absolutely. There's hundreds of varieties available. We're trying to show some varieties that will do well in the UK with some good potential for fruiting.
So you're sort of trialling them, really, pioneering.
It's a bit of a grand word, but yeah, OK, I'll say that.
But you want people to benefit from your trialling in a way to get better fruit. Now, what do you do with the fruit of an olive? Because I tried it straight off the tree once. It was so bitter.
Yeah, you need to cure the fruit in salt water to remove the bitterness. At the moment, we did try with our limited fruit last year making oil, which was a complete disaster. After a couple of days, I had enough for about 2 salads. So
is there ornamental use mainly?
Ornamental use, but we use the fruit juice as fruit. You know, At the moment, we're just using it for ourselves.
So how long in salt water till you can actually eat one?
It's about 3-4 weeks, and you need to change the water every few days. There's different methods of curing. The Greeks and Spanish and Italians all do it in a different way.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. I didn't know there were so many varieties available. Fantastic. You got a bronze, your first time at Chelsea. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Olive trees are often used to add a touch of decoration to a garden, which is what we're looking at in our next subject. This O is for ornamental gardens, and we're getting advice from Harlow Carr's Senior Supervisor, Alison Mundy, on how to create one.
Here at Harlow Carr, we treat the vegetable area the same as anywhere else in the garden. It's got to be very decorative, but it's also got to be productive, and we choose the varieties with that in mind.
Vegetables should be a feast for the eyes as well as the table. I'm really passionate about vegetables. I'd really like people to grow them as well, but not feel that they've got to get into these great allotment situations or have a great complicated time for it. Just use a bit of bare earth that you've got and you can grow just about anything. We use a lot of pots in the garden. It's a great opportunity to use spaces that are occurring naturally throughout your herbaceous borders or shrubberies throughout the year. So we've actually got pots that we've sowed with vegetables, salads, and then as these are harvested or go over, we can have some more waiting to go in. Some of the pots will just sit on the surface, and some of them we'll put a little bit further back and sink them slightly so they get the benefits of keeping the roots cool and we don't have to do so much watering. In this bed, we've chosen a combination of plants to give some height in the kitchen garden. The amaranth over here is a relation to the Love Lies Bleeding amaranth, but this is a grain plant. We've never grown it up here before, so we're going to be interested to see what happens with that. Sunflowers, of course, are great for the wildlife. They attract lots of bees, hoverflies, and later on when the seeds form, you get a crop, of course, of sunflower seeds that you can eat yourself. At the front here, we've got a beautifully coloured runner bean, and I think this combination works really well as a whole. Flowers are a great thing to have in the vegetable garden, of course. As well as looking attractive, they bring in lots of wildlife, and several are edible. For example, the borage flowers, the nasturtium, and also calendulas or pot marigolds.
And for more inspiration, let's join Joe Swift on a visit to Alnwick Gardens in Northumberland.
This is the ornamental garden, and it's one of the most exciting spaces here at Alnwick. It's packed full of plants with some great combinations. It's set within a very traditional walled garden, but what's interesting is everything here has a modern twist. There's a strong geometrical layout combining squares, rectangles, circles and triangles to form a structured framework. Yew buttresses planted against the old brick walls were a really nice touch, adding a simple rhythm and a sense of solidity to the space.
What really excites me about this garden is that at first you look at it and it feels so familiar, but then you look a little bit deeper and the plants that are used here are really quite unexpected. For a start, we've got these wonderful pleached crab apples that are defining this area here. I've never seen crab apples pleached like this, but they're a brilliant choice because they've got great autumn colour, and look at them at the moment, they've just got wonderful fruits all over them. They look absolutely perfect, and precision is key because they're the tallest element in the garden. Then we've got the yew hedges, exactly half the size of the crab apples, and then a cornice hedge, which I've never seen used so formally before, but that's exactly half the size of the yew again. But then within these defined spaces, you take a close look, and again, there's something being reinvented here. We see a traditional rose garden, standard roses, which has normally just got soil underneath, a bit boring. But here it's been planted with blueberries, which creates an understory to the planting, but also, of course, you get blueberries all summer long. But look at them now. Fantastic autumn colour, extending the season of interest. So yes, the structure feels pretty familiar, but the plants that have gone into it feel fresh and right up to date.
We're almost at the end of today's programme, and as promised, we're returning to the subject of orchids. So here's Mike Dilger, who's in Kent, looking for Britain's rarest wild specimens.
The Kent Downs are an area of outstanding natural beauty and support a wealth of plants, including a number of rarities.
And it's on this chalk downland I'm hoping to track down some of our most glamorous and mysterious wild plants.
Queendown Warren is a pristine downland valley, which in summer is full of flowers and insects.
What am I after? Orchids, the femme fatale of the plant world. And Kent is a great place to look for them, not just for the sheer numbers, but for some of the rarest too. Alison Wright of the Kent Wildlife Trust, what is it about orchids that people love so much? They're wonderful, aren't they?
Oh, they're amazing. I think it's just, you know, they're rare, they're unusual, they have fascinating habits, and they're just like the plant equivalent to diamonds.
They're a girl's best friend.
Oh, yeah.
They're a guy's best friend too, because I like them. And they're just diverse. Look how many species we've got here. We've got fragrant orchids, and just over there we've got a pyramidal.
Yeah. Just starting to come into flower, so it's showing its pyramid shape that gives it its name.
Because they can flower anything from late spring to right the way through to late summer. So here's a good time now. In the middle of June, it's great, isn't it?
I mean, the best time is now when you've got so many out in flower, but you can see them right the way through the spring and summer season.
Wonderful. Now, I reckon this orchid is at the top of everybody's must-see list. It's the bee orchid, of course, and you can see how the lip perfectly resembles a bee. And it also smells like a female bee, so it attracts bees to come in to take away these little pollen sacs. But this one's a virgin because the pollen sacs are still stuck there.
Ironically, it doesn't even need to attract a bee, as the orchid is perfectly capable of self-pollination. Now this one isn't so colourful, but believe me, it's a real treasure.
Alison, what a cracking little orchid.
I know, they're amazing, aren't they?
It's of course the man orchid. It's called the man orchid for a very obvious reason, isn't it?
Yeah, if you take a close look at each one, you can see that right at the very top you've got a little bonnet, it's like makes its head, and below that 2 arms and 2 legs, just like a little stick person.
How rare is this orchid?
This is an extremely rare orchid. It's sort of really restricted to the southeast.
Wow, why has it declined so much? Because it was always quite uncommon, but now it's rare, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It needs chalk. We've had so much loss of chalk downland since the Second World War. They think up to 90% has been lost.
Really?
And added to that, it doesn't just like normal chalk downland. It likes a little bit of scrub. You can see all the long grass that we're in here, just to keep it a little bit damper than most. So it has really specific needs.
And the thing I love most of all is you look up and they're like men here. When you look right at the top, they're like little boys coming out. So should we call man and boy orchid?
Next stop is Parkgate Down, a diminutive reserve south of Canterbury. That's jam-packed with orchids.
In Rickards, reserve warden of this site, I have never seen so many orchids. The Kent Wildlife Trust must be very proud.
It's one of our real sort of key sites. It's absolutely fantastic. We've got tens of thousands of orchids on here.
I reckon I'm within 3 or 4 metres of about 200 orchid spikes. Flipping sensational.
It's the densities are wonderful, isn't it? And also the variety as well. The number of different orchid species is just stunning.
Why is the site so good?
It's a combination of lots of different things. One, it's an ancient, unimproved grass, and it's never been farmed intensively. The only farming that's gone on here is grazing, and that's happened for hundreds and hundreds of years.
It's never been ploughed, it's never been fertilised.
No.
And on most orchid sites, grazing is crucial. When do you do it and what do you use?
We do it generally from as soon as the flowers have all finished, which is kind of September, October time. Then we bring on our livestock grazers, which are Conic ponies or Highland cattle. These old, really tough breeds which can come in and graze the site hard for 3-4 months. And that's it, that's the management done for the year. It's pretty straightforward.
It's a botanical ticker's paradise. Let's wander on so we can see. Check out this beautiful show-off. This is the Greater Butterfly Orchid. Now this usually smells, but only in the evening. It's got a lovely smell. And that's because this is pollinated by moths, so that's why it smells stronger in the evening. So I actually think Greater Butterfly or Lesser Butterfly is a bit of a rubbish name, really. This should be called the Greater Moth Orchid. Now here's the real star that I've come to see. Once again, close up, the individual flowers have a quirky resemblance to something else. This is the creme de la creme of orchids. It's the monkey orchid, and it's incredibly rare, isn't it, Ian?
It's a real spectacle, because there's only 3 sites in the country where it exists.
But if you look at the individual flowers themselves, that's where they get the name monkey from, isn't it?
Yeah. They've got arms, they've got legs, they've even got a little tail and a little hooded head. They're sort of perfectly named, really, absolutely perfect.
Just wonderful. You know, when you look at orchids, you really have to get down on your hands and knees. Obviously, in this field, there are orchids everywhere. And we've had to lie down incredibly carefully so don't squash any of these orchids around us. But it's not just this wonderful monkey orchid. There's a orchid in front of you there as well, Ian.
We've got common spotters here. There's a tway blade up here. There's a patch of fragrant orchids right by our arms, which we're being very careful with. It's just a massive diversity of orchids in this field. It's wonderful.
But I have to say, these are all surrounding the star attraction.
Yes, definitely.
At the Royal St George's Golf Course on the East Kent coast near Sandwich, and this is one of the most difficult and well-known golf courses in the whole of the world. But I'm not here to practice my swing or my putting. I'm here for the last part of my orchid quest. So far, I've seen 11 different orchids in just 2 locations. And now I'm leaving the fairway and greens for the rough to track down a rare orchid that loves golf courses in southern England, the lizard. What a beautiful orchid to end on. And with peat forest, again, from Kent Wildlife Trust, they get everywhere. And why are they so common on golf courses, Pete?
Well, the lizard orchid is at the edge of its range here in Britain, and it's really down to climate. And this sandy soil here, which you often get on golf courses, is hotter, and it helps them out.
Well, it's called lizard orchid for a very obvious reason.
Yeah. And if you look carefully, you've got the tail and the 2 hind legs of a lizard just sort of disappearing into the flower. Well, that's the theory anyway.
Well, there we go, my 12th and final orchid. What a day I've had, and what a beauty to end on. And if you're a golfer in Kent, and you happen to be a rubbish one like me, and bash the ball into the rough, have a look for one of these as well as your golf ball. This is much better. What a gem.
I couldn't agree more. A real gem there. Well, that's all from us for today. Hope you join us next time on the A to Z of TV Gardening. Goodbye.